All right, let's start with a health update. So, coronavirus, the major way that it's affected me, if the aunt that died from it, so that's an effect, and I wrote an article on that, the short and long of grief, which I'm getting much better at communicating my theories of grief, which is good, because I think they can definitely help people. But the major way it's affected my personal health is that I went down to one chiropractic adjustment a week, and I was really hoping that would be okay and that would work and I would be up to being able to do that. And I've been trying to strengthen my neck. I'm always doing some sort of health experiment to try to get better. And I've been doing a wrestler's bridge or a neck bridge, which I used to do a lot of before the misadventure in Africa in 2015, the weakening of the neck and all my issues. But I couldn't do it for the first couple of years afterwards. My neck just wasn't aligned right. It wasn't strong enough to putting more pressure on it. Just made things worse, not better. I've gotten in good enough shape over the last several years now. 4 years, 5 years. It's getting insane. But I've gotten in good enough shape that I could apply that pressure and I would get it stronger instead of getting worse. And so I've been working on that, and I built up to a 3-minute wrestler's bridge, which is pretty good. Now, I was just building up on that as the coronavirus lockdown, quarantine disaster came in, and so it wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to be a little stronger before trying going down to once a week. We went down to once a week, and so that my chiropractor could comply with all the edicts being issued by the governor. And I didn't quite make it. I'd start feeling weird on day 5 and pretty bad on day 6, and then day 7 I would get an adjustment, and it takes me a few days to kind of readjust the 1 day or maybe 2, and then a few days like that are pretty good, and then a few days that are like not that good, and then an adjustment. And so for several weeks I went down. My health kind of just got worse every week a little bit. And it was starting to get not very good. And now I'm back up to 2 adjustments a week. I just did that first time last week, and this will be the second week of 2 adjustments again. So readjusting that, I had to stop doing the wrestler's bridge because my neck wasn't getting in a good enough alignment. That the one day I went to get in the wrestler's bridge, and I was like, oh, no, not happening now. And that was like a couple of weeks into the quarantine stuff, and it would have made it worse instead of trying to strengthen it to make it better. So we'll see if I do that again today, like if I can get into the wrestler's bridge, or if I can hold off another week till my spine recovers enough to try getting back into strengthening again. Yeah, so interesting experiments, which is good. Well, kind of, right? And what else? Oh, I was meditating more, right? I'm very bad. I'm very inconsistent, very bad at being consistent on anything. And I have extremely low conscientiousness scores, and I've been working on systems for that. I've tried a bunch and haven't really got anything to work, and some of the best psychologists in the world also don't know what will actually work for that. But I'm working on it. But when I was starting to get bad there, and I have the cycle, right? Being able to be strict when things are bad, and then not being as strict when things are better, and then you cycle back through. But I was focusing on meditating more, and that definitely did help extend how long the adjustments were working before I was having an issue, but not enough to actually be able to make it the week. Now, I was meditating like an hour a day, and that helped quite a bit. Maybe if I meditated 2 hours a day, it would do it, but 2 hours a day is so long to meditate. So I didn't actually end up trying that one of those weeks. Probably should have, but did not. So, interesting. We have bought a bunch of meat. Hard to come up with a freezer. All the freezers in the area were completely sold out. The United States is having a meat shortage for various reasons that are super interesting, like super crazy stuff that's going to be super important in history books in the future happening. But one of those minor things that are affected by that is the meat supply. Got a freezer. My dad had a freezer that he wasn't really using, so we were able to get that here. My neighbor Dave helped me transport it on a truck. And then we've been slowly stocking that with meat and kind of building up that way, which is cool. Because I, like, if I had to resort to eating something other than meat, my health would go, it would crash. It would be bad. Also, just playing with the idea of inflation, I don't really have money. But you should really have some real assets of some sort to hedge against the obvious coming inflation. And so I just played with the idea of ordering silver online, right? It's a weird thing to do. I have boots coming from online because I've needed boots for like the last couple of years. My Doc Martens have been worn out. I ordered some boots online. Really don't like to do that. I like to go into the store, test them out, try them with different inserts, and like find a fit I like. But with everywhere being closed and all this stuff, I ended up just eventually ordering them from Amazon, Zappos, Amazon. And I tried ordering silver online, so those are just like a little test order. I ordered these little Egyptian coins, which are sweet, and they are pure silver. They're only worth like a couple of dollars a piece. But I got a few of them, and I took. They're cool. They came in this little bag. Right, so you got like a little coin pouch, which is just hilarious. If you order the more traditional stuff, like the Walking Liberty silver coins, they won't come in a fancy little cloth bag. Little coin purse idea is cool. And I took pictures with them on my eyes, and it looked crazy. And I had them as cool. My friend Holly took the pictures, and I just posted them, with not too much of an explanation. The explanation was like me with silver Egyptian coins in my eyes, and you look dead, because that's the old school ancient Greek idea of putting coins in the eyes for the ferryman Charon to ferry you across the river Styx and into Hades and the afterlife. It's a cool thing. I think the Irish Catholics still do it somewhat. They have a little bit of that tradition sticking around, and super interesting. It looks cool. It'd be better if I probably had like bigger silver coins, but nevertheless, it's super interesting. Books, just because I'm reading tons of good books. I'm not going to go over them all. I got this little stack of interesting stuff. A bunch of other super interesting books I've come across recently. But this one, I take my covers off when I'm reading them, of the hard covers, because I don't like having the cover on and folding and stuff when I'm reading them. But The Bloody Tenant, this is by Roger Williams. And super interesting, in the 1600s, Rhode Island was specifically founded for religious freedom, which is like the first time in the modern world that something was really made to protect religious freedom. And then you get William Penn protecting it in Pennsylvania, and then it goes to Virginia with the Statue of Religious Freedom with Thomas Jefferson, and then the Memorial and Remonstrance by James Madison, and then religious freedom is protected in the United States. And that's it's just this crazy story, where Roger Williams is excommunicated from the Massachusetts colony because the Pilgrims weren't really seeking religious freedom. They were seeking somewhere where they could control religion so they could have religious freedom, but not other people. So it's a super interesting story that I've delved into recently. And that's partially because I've been looking at, I like history, and I especially like American history and American colonial history. But I've been looking at my genealogy, which is super interesting. And both sides of the family have done a little bit, right? So I had, I don't actually know, like a great aunt Lucille, something like that. And she had done some stuff, but not very much. But I got some of that paperwork from my Aunt Karen, which is super cool. And it was able to take us back far enough that I was able to connect with some other stuff online, wikitree.com. It looks like it's going to be immensely useful. I have to put more work into it, more time into it, but it's going to be immensely useful. I think I'm going to be able to take my father's side of the line at least back to the year 9. I found a guy that I believe it all links back well, that died by falling off a horse in Ireland in the year 9, but a bunch of other stuff, crazy stuff all over the place. And then my mother's side, my Aunt Lori, has done a bunch of stuff there, which is super good. And then my sister Amy, her husband Jameson, has done a bunch of genealogy stuff. And my mother's side, actually, like those trees eventually link up back there somewhere, which is super interesting. So I got a file from him. And then my Aunt Lori she's put together these books, which are super interesting and has a ton of info on it. And I've been digging through some of that, and we have the strong connection. She has a very strong connection all the way back to the Mayflower. So at some point, and multiple soldiers that fought in the Revolutionary War on the American side. Good side. Like 2 lieutenants, a private. There was one guy that was in the Battle of Saratoga, which is a huge turning point, right? The defeat of Burgoyne's army in the north, the British army in the north, which is what convinced, and which is where Benedict Arnold became a major hero, and which is what convinced the French coming to the war, which eventually is what allowed the Americans to defeat the British with Cornwallis and the army down in the south, which is what led to the British surrendering. So it's huge, and I have an ancestor, a direct ancestor right there. I only really care about direct ancestors. A lot of people get into like going out, how many spots removed you are from famous people, and my aunt has a bunch of this stuff. It's semi-interesting, but I'm not going to invest any time in that. I got to limit the time somehow. And so just direct ancestors, and it's amazing. So I want to join like the Sons of the American Revolution and the Mayflower Society and stuff like this, but they're going to cost probably like a few $100 a piece, put together all the paperwork, the time, and all that stuff. So that's a project for the next couple of years, maybe something like that, but super interested. Definitely going to get strongly into that. And I think I took my mother's side back to the Norman invasion. In 1066, when the Normans, right, the Vikings came down, they conquered part of France called Normandy, and then under William the Conqueror in 1066, the Normans came across and conquered England, which led to all sorts of stuff. Super important Charter of Liberties in 1100 under Henry I, which it looks like a direct ancestor was actually the purse bearer for Henry I, which is pretty crazy. And then his brother was the Norman Robert that led the Crusades, the first Crusades, which is pretty crazy. So a bunch of super interesting stuff. Anyways, next book, Taxation by Andrew Mellon. This is back in the 1920s. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. And the first chapter in this is like 13, 15 pages, somewhere in there. And if people would read that, it would like revolutionize our entire political, economic system. It's amazing. Like the answers are just so easy to obtain, but trying to get people to want to obtain them is super difficult. Super interesting, though. I was talking about that. I had a student in Russia. He's a finance director for a very large company, and he's obviously into economics, knows a lot about economics. I studied it, he majored in it in college. And we were talking about economics recently, and he was surprised about how much I know about it. It's super interesting. And eventually I'm going to write an article on my five favorite economists, which Andrew Mellon doesn't, he'll get a mention in there. He's not one of those 5 guys, but nevertheless. I just started checking this out, Niccolo Machiavelli. Right? Machiavelli is mostly known for The Prince, which is how does a prince or a king essentially control people through fear, manipulation, and corruption, and all this stuff, which he wrote that. But he was actually a Republican, right? He's for republics, and this is his discourses on Livy, and Livy was a historian from ancient Rome. Now, Livy wrote like 142 books on the history of Rome, like the whole thing, like it was, right? And we have like 35 of those books. Almost all of those books are lost to history. But Machiavelli wrote comments on like the first 10 books of Livy, I think. And you read those, and it's super interesting, right? His actual political philosophy is completely different than what he's known for now, which is ironic, one of those turns of history. This, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety by Peter Breggin. This is amazing. And like emotion, psychology stuff. I'd never heard of this guy before. And I was digging into, well, I was looking at some of the coronavirus stuff, right? Finding some published papers in 2005 and 2009. There were research articles showing that chloroquine is an effective treatment and preventative for coronavirus, and those were just publicly published articles. And then there was one in 2015 funded by the U.S. and China showing that they had modified a coronavirus specifically from bats to infect humans. And so it was interesting. I was digging through that stuff, found one of those things through that psychiatrist, and I'd never heard of him before. Checked him out. He's a psychiatrist that's mostly against psychiatry, right? Because he's against psychiatric drugs. So that's mostly what he's built his career on. But that was one of his newest books from just a couple of years ago. And it is just astounding. It's super interesting. It's really intense. And actually, I'm reading it at the same time, just for me personally, but I'm reading it at the same time as I'm reading a book by Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership, and he's a former Navy SEAL commander, lieutenant commander, and which is super interesting. And like the meshing of those two things is amazing. Especially like I'm reading it with reading back through a thing by Carl Jung, who's a psychologist, Hannah Arendt, who's a super good philosopher, Roger Scruton, a super good philosopher, and kind of melding those ideas together. And that's, I think, something unique might be able to come out of that. Super interesting. And then I'm reading this play, Kato, a Tragedy by Joseph Addison. So this thing he's a British writer from the early 1700s. And, I like a lot of the old stuff. People undervalue that. And the impact that they've had on history. There's John Ponnet writing a political treatise in the 1500s, just wonderful. Estienne de la Boetie writing his thing on the discourse of voluntary servitude, also in the 1500s. Just astounding stuff, right? It's insights that are perfectly applicable today. And this play, Cato, is about Cato, the younger from ancient Rome, in the fall of the Republic when Caesar's taking over and resisting that idea. He wrote this in the early 1700s, and it was hugely influential on the American founding fathers. Hugely influential. A lot of the most famous quotes by the famous fathers, the founding fathers, were inspired, and they were rewordings of phrases from this play. When Benjamin Franklin was working on writing, when he was young, he was practicing writing, he copied the writing of Joseph Addison to try to take on some of his style, because he thought his style was so good. That's how influential Addison was. And he was one of the first guys to really bring out essays. Right? It was kind of a new thing in the early 1700s, and he was a huge essayist, wrote hundreds of them. There's some included in that collection, and it's just super, super interesting. It's one of those things like, have you ever heard of Cato by Joseph Addison? It's like a thing that's kind of been lost to history and is super important in history. And there's no reason for it to be lost. It's like, it's good. It's so crazy. We've had snow a couple of times the last couple of days. So that's super interesting, because it's getting near the middle of May here. So, darn global warming kicking our butt. The water level in Lake Michigan is huge. It's getting to the point where it's taking out some roads and some houses and some piers and a bunch of everything. So I've been going and checking that out at different places, going for walks, and some parks you can't even go in because they're completely flooded. And I've had some roads closed, and it's at its high point. It better start going down this year, right? It goes in cycles, like 20-year cycles or so. So it's got to be right about its high point. I figured it would start going down this year, because if it doesn't, we're going to lose some roads like all over the place. We have lakes and rivers everywhere, and we're just going to lose some roads that you wouldn't expect to be losing, because essentially there's little swampy areas and ponds that have become lakes, and if those keep expanding, we're going to lose some stuff. So super interesting. The kids, Kristen's kids, Evie and Judah, are really getting into Harry Potter now, which is super interesting. Evie especially, because she's like 3.5, somewhere in there. She can go through and like describe the scenes so well and say in which movie which scene is, and it sounds like she's getting interested in the books, and it's super interesting to watch and very applicable to life as well, right? Which is that importance of play as a rehearsal for life. I've written some essays on that, the value of horror stories. My essay explains that pretty well. And super good book, Children and Play in the Holocaust. box over there. I can't remember who it's by, but kids adapt. That's how you adapt. That's how you prepare for the future. And it's incredible to watch how powerful the narratives are. And so the one day she pulled out a chair by a table, and there happened to be a little spider there. Right? And she automatically reacted, that fear reaction. I just happened to be standing right behind her and I saw her do that, and I think she said spider. And I said something like, remember how Ron is scared of spiders, but then and I didn't even say anything else. Remember how Ron is scared of spiders? Well, we've talked a bunch of times at this point how being afraid of something doesn't mean you have to be like whiny or run or any of this stuff. It means you have the potential to be brave and step forward in that situation, right? Depending on the context. So I didn't even say the rest of it. I just said, remember how Ron is scared of spiders? And she immediately just stepped forward and crushed the spider with her foot. So it was like this. There was no hesitation. It was crazy to watch the power of narratives and character identity with heroes and that type of stuff. Just super interesting stuff. There's a couple of big things I've been working on arranging. One is my mother's birthday party, and this is her 60th, and her birthday is on the 4th of July, and a lot of times we just have like a cake, like at the normal 4th of July outing, something like that, so it kind of gets lumped in, and I want to do something different. So there's a riverboat, the Grand Lady Riverboat down in Grand Rapids that we really like going on. It's a super cool ride, 2-hour ride, and big paddle wheel in the back, and it's very nice. So that would be a cool thing to do, to have an evening ride on the 4th of July. The issue with that is, people want to go to fireworks and this type of stuff, and they're going to have a band, I don't really want that. I wanted people to be able to come and then go do whatever they normally want to do with their family, friends, something like that. So if you just buy 20 tickets, they'll open up a different time for you. So I just bought 20 tickets and then opened up a ride from noon to 2. That way people can still go to their stuff afterwards. And so we got that event going on, which is going to be super cool. So that's going well. And then I arranged a flight. Oh, man. Because I need to test. I've been talking about it for a super long time. I've been talking about it for like a year. I planned to do it last fall. I didn't get around to it. And then I didn't do it over the winter. And honestly, I'm quite nervous about it. But at some point, I have to take a flight. Because I took a flight 2 years ago to Colorado to do Alligator Wrestling, which still sounds crazy to say because it seems to make no sense. But it's true. True story. And I wasn't feeling good by the time I got there, like pretty bad. And so it was just the pressurization of the plane because of the way some of my neck deformities are. My odontoid off my C2 in the front is pulled back, and my brainstem formed kinked around that, but still my fluid doesn't flow. My cerebrospinal fluid doesn't flow properly. And so it seems to be that the pressurization of the cabin messes that up to some extent. But I don't know how bad, because when I got back from Alligator Wrestling, it took me 6 weeks to recover from that. I was not ready for that big of an adventure. It was a lot of fun, though. And I worked up to a 9-footer, or a 3-meter alligator, which is pretty intense. The best video is of the 2-meter, the 6-footer, though. Cujo, the one that bit off some other people's fingers. They had jars of fingers, and that was a fun trip. I met some cool people, stayed with them, Airbnb. Wendy was her name. It was super interesting in a log cabin. And so I don't know how much it was the alligator wrestling that messed me up for 6 weeks versus how much it was the plane ride that messed me up for 6 weeks, the combination. So if I take a flight and the flight messes me up, that's not good. If I take a flight and it messes me up for 1 day, not too big of a deal. It means I can still travel. I still have the potential for trip to islands or to Europe or, Asia, cool places. If I take a flight and it messes me up bad for 2 weeks, I don't have this will be my last flight. So I have to take a flight and test that. And it keeps kind of getting put off. I'm like, fine, I have to do it. At some point you have to take the jump. You can think about things forever. You can think about things for a long time, but at some point you have to do it. And so I was like, I'm just going to look up tickets. I found the cheapest possible ticket going out of Grand Rapids. It was to Savannah, Georgia. I bought it. It was $70-some round trip. Cheap. It was just the cheapest flight in the United States. And they canceled it because of coronavirus. And so now I have to re-a voucher. You know, I'm not going to be able to get a flight that cheap again, but I'll still be able to get a cheap one, probably from Grand Rapids to Florida somewhere. And so I'm going to do that test still here in the near future sometime and see. They're canceling on flights and stuff. The normal flight from Grand Rapids to Boston is just canceled forever in the future, as far as I can tell. The flights to Georgia, they're like spacing out further and further and doing less and less of them, and that seems to be happening across the board because basically the governmental response around the world to coronavirus has been in the best interest of the governments. But at some point, I'm going to try this flight here in the near future because I bought one ticket, and I'll have to use that voucher sometime in the near future, and we'll see how it goes. I'm quite nervous about it, partially because it'll feel bad, right? If I get there and I feel bad for a couple of days, and then I get on the flight to come home, which is going to be horrible, right? Because you know it's going to mess you up more. And then I get home and I feel bad for however long I feel bad for while I'm recovering. That's all a bummer. Don't like feeling bad. But, you know, I still have a headache from December 2015, so it's not like I'm a stranger to feeling bad. I've done a lot of feeling bad physically in my life, so I can handle that, but it's like this depressing aspect of, if it doesn't work, that's my last flight in this life, right? So it's kind of like this huge thing hinges on it. And it'd be cool. I was like, all right, if it fails, maybe what else can I do? Like, you can take a boat to Europe, right? It takes 2 weeks to get there, costs more money. It takes 2 weeks to get there, and then you spend however long you're going to spend in Europe, 2 weeks back, so you get a month on a boat. And now, I just tried doing one adjustment a week and couldn't do it for very many weeks because my health kept getting worse each week, which means I need 2 adjustments a week. So are they going to have a chiropractor on the boat? Maybe. I don't know. And then, it's a lot to arrange logistically. So we'll see. Super interesting. If not, I guess I'll just be in one place. Maybe I'll try a motorcycle trip across the United States. Still could potentially logistically arrange that. Got to get in some sort of adventures still. And we're just going to find out if that can include a flight, or to a large extent elevation change, because if I can't take the pressurization in a cabin, I think that probably eliminates scuba diving, and it might eliminate going into mountains. I'm not sure how much it'll affect, so it'll be interesting to find out. There's a lot more stuff that happened. A lot more books I'm reading, a bunch of super interesting stuff I'm looking into, and interesting stuff I'm doing. But for now, that is the end of this episode of Jeff's Journey, and I will see you in the next one. Jeff, out.